It's not doing something to someone or doing for someone. It's life together with someone and receiving from. If we really truly believe that there is this treasure in each human being who bears the image of God, then it really is about mutuality and belonging.
Hi friends, I'm Amy Julia Becker, and this is Love is Stronger Than Fear, a podcast about pursuing hope and healing in the midst of social division. In this season, we're talking about how we can respond to the brokenness in our own lives and in our society with our heads, hearts, and hands. Today, I get to talk with Matt Floding about his experience of using his head, heart, and hands, though he doesn't use those words, but I think you can trace that line if you want to as you listen to this interview. How he's using his soul self to respond to needs in his community. On a personal level, this is a story of how one person bumping into some friends in a church narthex led to a decade of transformative housing situations for graduate students and adults with intellectual disabilities in various spots across the nation. On another level, it's a story about all of us and how when we refuse to believe in scarcity, when we refuse to believe in fear, and instead when we believe in abundant love and abundant provision, there's a lot of beautiful work that can get done. I'm excited for you to get to listen to this conversation today. Well, I am here today with Matt Floding, the Director of Ministerial Formation at Duke Divinity School. And I am sure that in this conversation, some aspect of Matt's professional work will come up, but I'm really here to talk to him about his work with Friendship House Partners. I'm going to have him explain more about what that is, but I'll give you a little glimpse. It's a model for housing and forming relationships between graduate students and adults with intellectual disabilities. And it's about forging relationships of mutual giving and receiving, which is what is interesting and beautiful, actually, to me about it and why I want to talk to him about it, too. So, Matt, thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be here, Amy Julia, and thank you for your support for Friendship House over the years.
My pleasure. I have, as you know, have been a big fan almost since the inception of Friendship House. I feel like, I was on the ground floor, so to speak, although the house had already been built. And I want to go back earlier than that and ask if you could talk about that time when I believe you were at Western Seminary. And here's my first question, though. So I don't think you had a grand plan that involved people with intellectual disabilities and seminarians that you then set out to execute. I mean, you kind of backed your way into this, I believe. And I wondered if you could tell us the story of how that initial Friendship House came into existence.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say backed into it. I would say God dropped it on us because my role at Western Theological Seminary was Dean of Students and working with field education, so internships. Mm-hmm. And in my role as Dean of Students, we were growing as a seminary and we needed additional housing. So I was thinking about adding some housing and wondering what that might look like. And concurrently, I was reading some asset-based community development theory. And this one thing had kind of stuck in my brain, which was needs produce assets. And I thought that's really interesting. I wonder how that works. And I mean, it wasn't 2 weeks after reading that on a Sunday morning, this was 2005, Bob and Deb, after church in the narthex, you have these conversations over coffee, approached me and they said, our son Rob, and I knew Rob, who lives with Down syndrome, wants to live independently like his older siblings, and we don't know what to do. And very naively, I just said, well, you have a need, we have a need for additional housing. Let's put those together and see what can happen. And so I asked them, do you know any other couples in a similar situation? And this was one of my first learnings, was that parents who have been advocating fiercely for their kids' inclusion in things in the world have banded together. And of course they knew other couples. Right. And so we started meeting together, and Friendship House emerged out of those prayerful meetings.
All right, so I want to go back to a couple of these things. One, can you say a little bit more about that asset-based development theory? Is that what leadership theory? What did you say?
Development theory.
Okay. Can you just explain that a little more? Because I do think when I hear you tell that story, what you're telling me is you had a need and they had a need. And somehow in your head, you thought asset, but need plus need does not, for most of us, equal asset, right? So I'd love for you to just explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why it was stuck in my brain, because it's so counterintuitive.
Okay.
I mean, you think, like in most development campaigns, well, people with resources provide assets, not needs. And what I learned in that encounter, what happened in that encounter was just, again, it was naive. It was kind of intuitive that there was something good here that ought to be explored. And in truth, the two needs that we had, which were for safe, affordable, community-oriented housing, seminarians needed that. People living with an intellectual or developmental disability needed that. I mean, I soon learned that, over 70% of people living with an IDD still live at home with their parents.
Right.
And so, I didn't know that then. So there was this great need on both sides. And when they came together, all of a sudden, this community that surrounded these folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities and the trustees of the seminary who caught the vision and said yes to a campaign that would allow us to build it, allowed those needs to bring assets together.
So talk about how that progressed, right? You have this conversation in the narthex, you meet a few other parents, and somehow, the wheels starts turning. But I'm curious about, again, like literally how that happened. And also, I know that you were able to create a sustainable model that was addressing needs, again, for all these different members of the community. So I'd love for you to give us a little more detail.
So sort of step by step, I mean, first we started meeting and learning about what each community's needs were in housing. Because I didn't know what this particular needs of people with intellectual or developmental disabilities would be in housing. So we had to talk about accessibility and about close to cultural events, close to work opportunities, close to public transportation, very practical nuts and bolts kinds of things. And it turned out those weren't really unlike the needs of seminarians. It's just that they were two different communities that normally weren't brought together. So once we had that, we started looking at properties, existing properties, wondering could we buy one and redevelop it, repurpose it. Now, Western Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan is a residential seminary. And so people lived literally in these beautiful red brick Georgian townhomes across the street from the seminary and Hope College. And so as we looked at these properties, they were a little too far away, or they needed too much maintenance, or the ongoing concerns for landscaping. I just couldn't see taking those on. And so my daughter happened to be living in a pod concept apartment where each person had their own private space with a common kitchen, living room, dining room.
Yeah.
And so I just sort of sketched that out, and I brought it to the parents one night and said at one of our meetings and said, I don't think these other properties are going to do it for us. I think we need to build a purpose-built property. And I think it looks something like this. And they looked at the apartment and they got really excited.
Yeah.
And they said, yes, let's do it. And so one of the things that they did was they raised right on the spot $10,000 to retain an architect just to kind of flesh this out. My art wasn't going to cut it. So
it wasn't your area of expertise.
No, just to provide some renderings. And then we developed a proposal. And of course, in our administrative council, I was talking about it at the seminary level. And then with the person from the trustees who sat on the student life committee who would oversee housing if there were any development, shared it with them. And then finally brought it to the board of trustees to approve a campaign that would allow us to build Friendship House once we had raised enough money so that rent would cover the mortgage.
Okay. And rent from both seminarians and
from the friend residents.
Friend residents, okay.
Core residents. So I brought this proposal, and of course they had this in their minutes ahead of time, or in the agenda. So I brought it to them, made the proposal, and there was one question. The question was, Matt, how is Friendship House consistent with our mission? because they were having a hard time wrapping their mind around this mixed housing opportunity.
Why would we do this? Yeah.
And so I was ready, of course, and responded, well, there are over 40 million people living in America at that time with an identifiable disability. And should any one of us in this room live long enough, we will experience diminishment and disability. And there is nothing in our current curriculum that is preparing our students to lead that particular church and mission. And that's our mission, to prepare men and women called by God to lead the church and mission. And we're not doing it in this area. The chairman of the board called for the question. It's unanimous. We had permission to take off.
And so then I wanted, actually, I had the opportunity to visit this first friendship house at Western, I don't know, a decade ago, shortly after it first opened. It's a beautiful home, and it, again, in keeping with the neighborhood and exactly really what you just described as far as the pods with a common space. But can you tell me just how that works residentially? Who lives there? How do you decide who lives there? What's that process like?
Right. So our first task, once the building was built, and I will tell you that not only did we raise enough money so that rent would cover mortgage, but the entire building was paid for. So that it's actually revenue positive for the seminary. It generates revenue each year through rent that can be put into the operating budget of the school.
Wow.
So our first task, though, was to identify folks who could be residents who were from the IDD community.
Okay.
And so we had focus groups in the community to kind of explain what this housing was. So working with, the school district, some of the special meetings where different folks, different kinds of abilities were gathering for Bible study or community building kinds of things. And we just shared the vision of Friendship House. And out of that, we had people who went through an application process. And that included kind of telling kind of their own story and why they would want to live and why they thought they were ready to live independently and growing interdependent living skills. And then we selected folks who had applied and put them through an interview process. And that interview process included a parent of a person with an IDD. I asked a Hope College admissions person to sit in on it to make sure that and I asked her to not ask any questions, but just to guarantee that the process treated everyone absolutely the same. And that the questions were appropriate. Myself, a professor who dealt with special education, and then a person from the school district who had all of these persons in their classroom. So they were acquainted with the person and the families. So then we went ahead and had this interview process and ended up discerning 6 individuals a nice mix that we thought would work, could move in successfully.
Right.
And one of the things I assumed, because there were 6 apartments, that it would be 3 men, 3 women, but we discerned 4 women and 2 men, or 4 men, 2 women.
Okay.
And I asked, this troubled me a little bit because it didn't meet my expectations. But the special ed professor said, well, in the general population, the ratio men to women is about 2 to 1. So
of people with IDD?
Yeah. There were more males than females.
Huh.
And so she said, don't feel badly about this. And particularly because the housing need is so great.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and do this and let it spark the imagination of others to maybe create more additional housing. So we did that. And then we had an admissions process with students. And the first year we were grateful that we could fill 4 of the apartments because, we were coming at this brand new. And then the second year, because of the stories students told, we had a waiting list. to fill the apartments.
Right. Right.
And we designated one of the apartments as a free space for a resident assistant someone who lived in there to make sure that they were living the community building model that we hoped would guide life together, eating together, so enough designated meals together, praying together, and celebrating, finding every opportunity to celebrate life and each other.
I love that. Well, and that kind of actually leads right into my next question. I once wrote an article about Friendship House in which I said that it is not named Social Justice House or Pity for the Other House or Helping Those in Need House, which of course it wouldn't be, but that sense that the name itself suggests relationship and reciprocity rather than power or charity, which I think it's very easy from the perspective of thinking of what our culture values, which is often the status that comes from, being a graduate student, being a person who has the intellectual capacity to, sit in class at this high level of learning all day and go out and use that in the world. And yet what this is really saying is, no, these are relationships, again, of interdependence, not of power. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about why that mutuality is so important, and also how you knew that that was the way to frame it, because I'm not sure that's obvious to a lot of people who would be really well-meaning, but I think it could easily show up as more of this, we are here to help you poor, needy people, as opposed to that mutual exchange.
Well, I don't think I could say it better than Eric Carter says it. Special education professor at Vanderbilt, who says, pay attention to your pronouns. It's not doing something to someone or doing for someone. It's life together with someone and receiving from. If we really, truly believe that there is this treasure in each human being who bears the image of God, then it really is about mutuality and belonging. Yeah. And I think that's what, even though students can hear that language, I think subconsciously they go into it and they think, I'm going to do something for these individuals. But very quickly, they learn, because they're being hosted by these individuals, that it really is about life together with. And we really try and pay attention to that in the way that life is structured, in the meals together, in the celebrating together, because everyone has needs to be met.
I have loved getting to know some of the stories from both core residents and graduate students over the years, and I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But one of the things I'm really struck by is the idea of interdependent living rather than independent living. As the mother of a child with Down syndrome, I hear a lot about independent living, and I do wrestle with even that language a little bit, because I would hope, not just for my daughter Penny with Down syndrome, but for my other children and for myself as well, that we would not be looking to be autonomous individuals out in the world taking care of ourselves, but that we would actually see ourselves as ones who have something to contribute and offer, but also who always are going to have needs for, whether those are emotional, physical, social, relational, spiritual, whatever. We're going to have needs that only other people can fill for us. And so I love that idea of interdependent living and of naming it that rather than just calling it independent living.
I think, the skills that come with interdependent living, self-awareness, social awareness, active listening skills, this attentiveness and attending to each other is, these are kind of foundational skills for people going into ministry, but they're foundational skills for human beings who live in community. And I think, again, what shocks students is how sensitive their roommates, their friend residents are to their feelings and what's going on in their life, and how they feel with them and reach out to them. And the stories about that are just so moving. The caregiving that is extended by friend residents to students.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit about that experience, both for the core residents and also for the students who over the years now have lived in Friendship House. Although, let me actually pause for a minute, because Friendship House has grown beyond that first house in Western Seminary. So can you just give us a little, 10 years later, here's where things are.
Yeah. So when I was invited to come down to my position here at Duke, one of the conditions was you must bring Friendship House with you.
Wow.
And there was a wonderful ministry here called Reality Ministries, which creates spaces for people of all abilities to be in community and friendship. And so they were this marvelous partner community already to support the vision for Friendship House. And it came together literally. So I started July 1, 2012. We dedicated it in August 2013.
Wow.
So, I mean, the community down here has been incredible. But at the same time, over at Vanderbilt, Professor Jaco Hamann, who had been at Western Theological Seminary, began creating Friendship Houses there. And to be a Friendship House, I mean, you really have to commit to, and this is what Friendship House Partners does, is help people imagine in their context what could be a Friendship House. It's faithfulness to the mission, or the core mission idea, which is that life together, built around eating together, praying together, celebrating together, will make a Friendship House work. But then the second accountability sort of is your context. So each Friendship House looks a little different. The ownership is different. So at Western, it's seminary-owned housing.
Yeah.
Here in Durham, it's a nonprofit. Reality Ministries owns the Friendship House buildings and operates them in a sense in partnership with us.
Right.
A nonprofit owns them in Nashville in partnership with Vanderbilt. Shortly after that, at George Fox University in Newberg, Oregon, a ministry there out of Young Life called Mark II Ministries that operates a camp that has special sessions that are devoted to persons with disabilities and all abilities. Heard about Friendship House, and they partnered with George Fox University and were able to create Friendship House in homes that had been abandoned, but were at one time group homes that weren't successful. They were able to repurpose them into this very successful, effective model. And George Fox has been such a great partner with them in terms of incorporating all the residents into the life of the university. It's beautiful.
That is beautiful. And it does, well, what I want to speak to next is that sense of mutual benefit, where, again, we started with essentially mutual need, and yet where this all goes, not to say the needs are erased or something, but there is a sense of mutual benefit. And so I'd love to start with the core residents in terms of what their what motivates them to live there, but then also what have you seen? Because I know you've actually done some data tracking and not just anecdotal stories about all of this, but what have you seen that happens in their lives as a result of the experience of living in a Friendship House?
Yeah. So that professor at Hope College, the special education professor, we invited her to consider, with the family's permission, to do kind of a little bit of a longitudinal study. And as it turned out, there had been an instrument called the Anderle-Severson, ESTER-3, that had been administered in the public school that measured capacity. We don't like this word alone, independent living on 5 domains among all their students. And so we already had a baseline for where our residents where they'd come from.
So that was like in the initial interview, you used that.
We didn't use it because we weren't really quite aware of it.
Okay.
We weren't sophisticated enough. But then we learned about it.
Okay.
And she utilized that and re-administered it each year. And by the end of 3 years, all of the friends had outgrown that instrument's capacity to measure independent living. They had
like
grown
irrelevant.
So much.
Yeah.
And I remember just this one parent is saying, my son has blossomed in ways I could never imagine because I was doing things for him that I've learned he could do for himself.
Right.
So there was that piece of it. Vocationally, we invite the friend residents to have a part-time job or a significant volunteer opportunity. And I mean, I feel so happy when I think about going into the workplaces where our friend residents are, because it's almost like they own it. They own that space. And there's so much joy and community that's built with the coworkers. It's just, and I remember Megan, who works at a McDonald's, and Megan was very shy and reticent in terms of conversation. But after about 18 months, the McDonald's she works at cleaning tables.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly she knew everyone in that place. They knew her, and amazing.
Right. And it's
And here
all,
at Duke,
yeah.
Alex volunteers at the Duke Divinity Library. And I mean, again, he knows everyone. They all know him. He brings joy to that workspace. Phenomenal.
So I know, again, that for the, these residents who've been able to move out of their home, gain independent living skills in an interdependent web of relationships, which is beautiful, get a sense of vocation, use their gifts in the community. What about for whether it's seminarians or other graduate students who choose to live in Friendship House? What motivates them? How does it affect their lives? How does it affect their vocation?
Yeah, I mean, there are some folks who choose Friendship House because they have acquaintance or a sibling, or their church was doing something in the area of disabilities, and they know that they are going to be better prepared. So for them, it's a sense of this is the right thing to do and all. And others, it's sort of an intrigue. And I think once they get into it, they realize there's some painful things, like there are so many roadblocks in the way of people with disabilities to experiencing full life in the community. And they become very social justice minded in terms of, I'm going to go out as a pastor and do my best to remove some of these barriers, especially at church. And others, I think they end up hearing a call or discerning a call that definitely includes this. So Dan, who, when he's in a call kind of thing. So when he was going to be called to a church, when he was invited to come interview, he said, I would like to bring my roommate.
Wow.
And he said he did that because when he talked about being an inclusive congregation, he wanted Seth with him so they understood what he meant by that. And Seth traveled through the whole interview process with him.
Wow.
And his church is, I mean, people in that county know that's the church. And
where they mean it, right?
Yeah, and they caught the vision through that interview process because his roommate could participate. Others have created housing opportunities. Greg has created a home called Corner House, where he and his wife and little children live with 4 special needs adults, and they intend for it to be permanent housing. An age in place opportunity.
Right.
Others have moved into working with nonprofits that work with folks of all abilities.
Yeah.
So there's a whole range of impacts on students, but no one goes unchanged by the experience.
Well, that's what it sounds like, because I know when I was speaking with some of the graduate students in both the Western and Duke context, what I heard about was much more in the present tense, because that's what they were living, in terms of just the gratitude for friendships that felt in many ways more honest and reciprocal and real than any friendships they'd ever had in the past. There was just a sense of, this person really sees me and knows me, not for what I can produce, but for who I am. And that was a new experience for at least some of the men and women that I was speaking to. And I can certainly relate to that if you're in a academic environment where you're always being praised for your performance and achievement, to come into a set of relationships that really are not based upon that, but based upon who you are, that is both unnerving and really freeing at the same time. Well, at least I imagine.
And you're a Princeton grad, so I mean, so you know about academically rigorous environments. Students here, I mean, I love that they call it Friendship House, so divinity is seminary for the head, and Friendship House is seminary for the heart.
Mm.
And it's that integration of the two that makes it the richest divinity school experience possible.
That's really beautiful. I'm curious to hear about whether there have been challenges. I mean, I'm sure there have been, either on an organizational level or just within the different houses, as far as challenges residents have faced, or challenges in trying to figure out how to, on some level, this is kind of a fairy tale story. I bump into someone at church and all of a sudden we've raised the money and here are the people and it's amazing and beautiful, which it is, but I'm curious about the challenges.
Yeah. So there, maybe you'll be surprised to learn there are more challenges between students, like roommates in undergrad, that have conflicts than actually with the friend residents.
Yeah.
And but that is this growth opportunity about learning conflict resolution styles, and that's what we have to do. I mean, this is this learning opportunity to reflect on our experience in life together, and let's grow through it.
Yeah.
But we have had challenges with friend residents too. For example, one particular friend resident lives on the autism spectrum, and we needed to learn by listening to her that living with 3 people felt a little chaotic, and it made her upset over time.
Yeah.
And so we had to figure out what would be an appropriate situation. And as it happened, in the summer, 2 of her roommates went to go to internship somewhere else in the country. So she was only living with 1 student during the summer. And they had the most lovely experience possible. So we said, if we listen to her experience, she's telling us, and she's now articulating that living with 1 person is better for her.
Right.
Let's make that arrangement happen. And so we did. And it created another opportunity for another friend resident that for whom living with 3 people and this Friendship House community was okay, but for whom the other, it shut her down and made her angry because it didn't feel good.
Right.
So it's learning to read cues and responding appropriately.
I'm curious about the broader impact in the community. I remember that at Western, there was a sense of Friendship House becoming a hub, not just for the people who lived there, but for other people as well. And I'm curious if you've seen that over the years and in different places.
Yeah. When, up in Holland, Michigan, when homes would become available in the next block over, a couple of families bought those, intending those to be for their children. And one of the things that happened in the way it was structured in Holland at Western was that you would time out. So it was a 10-year window of opportunity, and then give the family time to figure out what would work. So some of the friends went into those housing opportunities. 2 fellows moved into the seminary, said, well, we don't want to lose the impact here. And we haven't opened one of these townhouses we could reserve for people who are timing out. And so 2 of the guys moved literally across the street, and are living independently together in their townhome. And I visited them, and they're having a great time together.
Yeah.
In like that corner house that I mentioned, that's 1 block over from Friendship House here in Durham. And I can't really speak to the other contexts.
Yeah.
But there is a church-owned Friendship House in Terre Haute, Indiana. Indiana State University students are the student residents.
Yeah.
But it's owned by the church. And through the network of relationships there, it's creating a much greater awareness of the needs of people of varying abilities. And so, so I think it does have sort of those unintended consequences too that roll out from it.
And then I'm also wondering, so on this podcast in general, I mentioned this to you before we started recording, that I'm trying to ask this question: how can ordinary people respond to social divisions with hope and with healing. And one of the reasons I wanted to get you to talk is that you were not setting out to start a nonprofit to change the lives of people with intellectual disabilities or any such thing, but you were, I think, in a place of being open and responsive to what the Spirit of God was doing in your life and in your community. All the same, it can be kind of overwhelming, I think, to see how many needs there are in the world and to recognize that within that, I am a person with my own frail and vulnerable needs, and yet feel some sense of like empowerment to step forward, to participate in healing. So I'm wondering whether you have any thoughts on what it means for people who, again, are not quitting their day jobs, right? But all the same, wanting to be a part of, whether it's in the area of disability or race or immigration or politics, but some sort of bridging or healing these social divides.
I think one of the things that I learned very early entering these communities is the use of person first language. And out of that, you realize, because one of the parents' delights in their observation was, my child's roommates don't view them as a diagnosis. They view them as a person. And that I've just come to believe that person first language is a key to my relationship across racial lines, across economic divisions, thinking of the immigrant community. Before I label them with any diagnosis, any label whatsoever, the disability community has taught me that they are a person first. And that child of God, or the belovedness and the dignity that comes with being made in the image of God, the disability community gets that. And if I can keep that in my head, person first, that means one of the things that I can do is initiate relationships so that I learn that person as a person first. And I hope that can build bridges of understanding, of empathy, so that I approach these challenges thinking about human beings and not the problem or a diagnosis.
And it also strikes me, I'm thinking back to the asset-based development theory, and that, because I remember when we talked about this a long time ago, hearing you also say, I am just going to assume that if I follow a God who is a God of abundance and not of scarcity, that is also a part of all of this, right? And I think that can work on two levels. One, there's an abundance of people who can participate in this. So I've got my one small part to play. And so rather than being overwhelmed when I think about all the housing needs of all the people, whether it's in the realm of disability or poverty or whatever, it's like, you know what I've got right now is some residents of a seminary who need housing and some residents of the community who need housing. And that's what I'm going to focus on. And I'm just going to play my small part. But so there's like a humility, but there's also a trust that is looking at, or assuming that God is actually looking at the whole and that I have a small part to play. But then there's also that sense of, and without being too, over spiritual about it, that like their provision will be made. Like there is an abundance. We're not going to run out. Like let's just see what comes as we take the next step forward. And I think it's I love the story of Friendship House because there have been these deliberate, thoughtful steps that have nevertheless been taken, I think, in faith in a God who is an abundant provider.
It is. And it's not about heroism because it's a team sport. I mean, it took all these families, the bigger community to embrace this. People, for example, in Holland who weren't necessarily people of faith, but just felt like this dignifies our community. It's the right thing to do. So I'm in. And they donated generously and followed the story and affirmed and celebrated with us. And it's hard not to get pretty spiritual about this too, because of, prayers that were literally answered
Right.
a provision at the right time to make things happen the way that they did.
And am I right that Western now has, it's like the first, Western Seminary is the first seminary to have some sort of disability certificate program, or
Yeah.
am I making this up? Okay, what?
So, I mean, so that would be another outcome, an unintended consequence
Yeah, I
outcome.
just remembered this.
Yeah. So they called, when they called a professor that they needed to fill in the theology area, they deliberately chose someone who did theology and disability. And so Ben could create this certificate in theology and disability to equip people who wanted to learn more and be able to engage in their context.
Yeah. Well, I love thinking about those ripple effects, which I don't think you'll know this side of heaven, all of the ones that are there, but in terms of just beginning with a need and a conversation in a church narthex, and then, landing in this place and knowing that that'll continue. If people want to know more about Friendship House, I'm sure there are going to be listeners who think, gosh, I wonder if something like that could happen in my community. What would you say? Where should they go? I mean, I know there's a website, and we'll put that in the show notes, and you can mention it here, but also what would be first steps to take?
Yeah, I would say go to the Friendship House Partners website, friendshiphousepartners.com, and read some of the stories. Look at the example of a handbook, sort of an operational manual, and just say, is this something that we could do in our community? And since you've heard that it could be nonprofit, it could be institution, school, it could be church owned, it can bloom where it's planted.
Right.
If the right people just come together and wish to see it happen.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Matt, so much for your time and for your faithfulness over these many years. I'm really grateful to have you here today.
Thank you, Amy Julia. It's great to be with you.
Thanks again for listening to Love is Stronger Than Fear. I do hope you'll check out Friendship House Partners and let other people know about this initiative. I also want to thank our co-host, Breaking Ground, thank Jake Hansen for editing this podcast, and say thank you to Amber Beery, my social media coordinator, who supports this show in countless ways. Thank you for being a listener, for sharing the message of hope and healing in a world that is broken in so many ways. And as you go into your day today, I hope you will carry with you the peace that comes from believing that love is stronger than fear.